Hey guys, welcome to day 14 of 100 Days of Code. Today you're going to spend building a exciting game called Higher or Lower. And if you want to have a go at it, just go over to higherlowergame.com and click on Classic. So the classic version of Higher Lower is you compare one search term, the Grand Budapest Hotel, which is a movie, against another search term, AFL, which is the American Football League. And you have to say if the second one has higher or lower searches than the Grand Budapest Hotel. So I think this probably has higher, and indeed I'm right. And now it gives you a new term to compare. So Six Nations rugby versus AFL, who has lower? I think this probably has lower, and I'm right. And you keep going until you get it wrong. And it's a weirdly addictive game for some reason. Okay, so now I've gotten it wrong and it tells me how many I got right as my score, and I can play again if I wish to. Have a play around with that game because the final version we have looks a lot simpler, but it's still just as fun to play. Instead of comparing average monthly searches on Google, we're comparing who has more followers on Instagram. So we're bringing this game up to date. In this case, it's comparing Neymar, a footballer from Brazil, against Khloe Kardashian, a reality TV personality and businesswoman from the US, who has more followers. So I think it's B. I could be wrong, and I'm wrong. So here we're comparing Rihanna, a musician and businesswoman from Barbados, against Shakira, a musician from Colombia. So I'm going to guess probably Rihanna. And I get it right, so I get to score 1 point. And this game continues on and on until you get to the point where you get it wrong, same as the one that you saw before. And there we go. So I got 3 as my final score, and that's the end of the game. The aim of the game is to try and stay alive for as long as possible and score as high as possible by thinking about who might be more popular than the other. Now, here comes the interesting part. You're going to be coding up this game entirely by yourself. You're going to apply everything you've learned so far to understand how this game works by playing it quite a few times, going to this URL, and looking at all the specific nuances. What happens if you get it wrong? What happens if you get it right? And you're going to write the code all yourself. And you're probably going to need your skills of debugging to fix some problems as you go along as well. So the approach I want you to take is first think about the problem and then break down a large problem into smaller problems. This way you can tackle them one by one and it won't be so intimidating. Now, step 2 is to look at those problems and make a to-do list. Given the items on the to-do list, you're going to pick the one that you think is the easiest to begin. Let's say that maybe generating a random number. That's pretty simple, right? Well, in this to-do list, that's the first one we're going to tackle. So in this case, we're building a very simple dice game, right? The game that you're going to be building is a lot more complex. It won't just have 3 to-dos, but the idea is the same. Once you pick the task that you think is the easiest, generating a random number, then you're going to take that problem and you're going to break it down into comments in your code. So just as you've seen me do it for our previous projects, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to take that problem of generating a random number and then split it into different pieces, right? First, you probably have to import the random module, and then you probably have to use a function like randint to generate a random integer. So now that you've taken a big problem and broken it apart into smaller problems, taken the easier smaller problem and break it down into comments in your code, then you're ready to start writing some code. So write code beneath the comments, run your code, make sure that it does what you want it to do, and if it doesn't, then fix the code. And once you've done that, then it's back to the beginning, write more code under the comments, run more code, fix more code, until you've managed to cross out that task. And then it's a case of tackling the next one that you think you can attempt. So this is the real skill of programmers, taking something that's immensely complex and difficult, breaking it down into smaller problems, breaking it down further, and then tackling them from the easiest to the hardest, and doing this one by one. Eventually, by the end, you end up with your final product. This is what I want you to do. So the first thing you're going to do is to head over to the final version of the game, play it at least 10 times, just so you understand exactly how it works. And then pull up the starting code for the day, which is the higher lower start, and go ahead and fork your own copy of it. Now you'll notice that there's 3 files in the starting code. One is the art.py that contains the logo and the versus symbol that shows up when it asks you to compare. So compare A, Cristiano Ronaldo versus B, Vin Diesel. And these are the art that you're going to display. And finally, and probably most importantly, there is a file called game data. Now, game data only contains a single variable. It's a list of dictionary entries. Each of these dictionaries have 4 keys, and the keys are the same for all of the entries. They've got a name, the name of the account, the follower count, so how many followers in millions does that account have? So for example, Cristiano Ronaldo has 215 million followers, at least at the time when I compiled the data. And then it has a description. He's a footballer, or this is a social media platform. She's a musician and actress. And finally, the country that they're from. You're going to use all of these pieces of information to construct a comparison line like this. Compare A, Cristiano Ronaldo, footballer from Portugal, with B. And you're going to ask the user to guess who has more followers. And if they get it right, they get to keep playing, where A now becomes the previous B. So Vin Diesel, who used to be B, now becomes A. And then you get to compare against a new person. And it keeps on going until they get it wrong. That is the task ahead of you. And it's not going to be easy, but I think you can do it. So give this project at least an hour. You'll need to write the code, you'll need to fix problems, you'll need to debug, you'll need to test it quite a few times. But by the end of it, you will emerge a stronger programmer, I promise. So good luck, and make sure you have lots of struggle, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, so I really hope you've given this challenge a good go and you've spent at least an hour toiling over it and struggling, and you should be wiping sweat off your brows before you come and look at the solution. The struggle is so important and I can't stress it enough. But in this lesson, I want to run through how I would tackle this problem. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to do the same thing. There isn't one solution. There's probably thousands of different solutions for a project like this. And as long as your program runs exactly the same way, then you've succeeded. It doesn't matter at this stage how you've done it necessarily. As long as you manage to organize your thoughts, break down the problem, and write the solution code and get it to run, then you are victorious. The real challenge in today's project was for you to break down a big problem into smaller solvable chunks. It isn't even so much the code that matters. It's this skill that you really need to develop to become a really good programmer. And so far, I've been breaking down the problem for you, showing you the steps that would take you to the solution. But now you're really wearing the big programming pants and you're doing it all by yourself. So let's think about this problem and how we would break it down. There's some easy problems here, right? We need the art to display. So let's add a comment for each problem we identify. We've got the ASCII art showing up here, and we've got the verses showing up here. Now the next one is we've got these randomly generated accounts, right, from the data. So we've got Camila Cabello and Emma Watson. How do we get these random accounts to show up? That's another problem, right? So we know that we've got all of this game data here in the format of a dictionary that's nested inside a list. And we need to figure out a way of pulling out a random account from this list. So that's another problem I've identified. Now, the next thing you'll notice is that the data contains many key value pairs, the name of the account, the description, etc. But when we display it, it's all nicely formatted. The name, and then what they do, and then where they're from. We'll have to add that as probably another problem to solve. How do we format the account data into a printable format? Okay, so let's say we solve that and we've got A and B. Now we have to ask the user for a guess. Guess who has more followers. So that's another problem to solve. And when they do type an answer, let's say we think maybe A has more followers, then it's going to have to check that answer and see if it's correct or if it's wrong. So that's going to be a big problem. Check if user is correct. Because that's going to require a couple of things, right? We're going to probably have to break down this problem into smaller problems if we want to solve it. So, for example, we probably need to figure out the follower count of each account. And then we'll probably need to use an if statement to check if user is correct. Now, if we get it right or if we get it wrong, the game is always going to give us some feedback. Sorry, that's wrong, or you're right. So let's add to our problem list. Now, in addition to giving them feedback, whether if they got it right or whether if they got it wrong, it also has a way of tracking score, right? Every time they get an answer right, the score goes up by 1. In addition to all of that, the game repeats itself when the user gets it right. So let's say in this case, I guess Dwayne Johnson. Then you see how the game repeats itself, right? It goes back and it takes Dwayne Johnson, puts it in position A, and generates a new account in position B for me to go again. So I get another round because I got it right. So we'll need to address that in our code as well. Have some sort of way of make the game repeatable. And it's not just repeatable, actually, because we also have to move the previous B up to the A position if they do get it right for the next round. So I think Khloe Kardashian maybe has less. Oh. So let's say I guess Dwayne Johnson again in this case. Now, if I get it right, Taylor Swift, who used to be at position B, now gets moved to position A, ready for the next round. So this is another problem we have to tackle. So not only does the game have to be repeatable, we also have to have some sort of way of making the accounts at position B become the next account at position A. And finally, notice that in between the rounds, if I get it right or if I get it wrong, the whole game actually clears the previous progress other than letting me know that I got it right and my current score, and it displays everything afresh. It doesn't clutter up the screen and I have to scroll down. So that's probably the last problem we'll need to tackle. So clear the screen. That's it, I think, for now. I've broken down this large problem, which is build this game, into a bunch of smaller problems, and as we code along, we're probably going to break them down even further. This really was the key skill that I wanted to test you on, being able to take a big project, turn it into smaller problems, and then tackle them one by one. So if you manage to get this far and you've managed to identify all the problems that you need to solve, you already should consider yourself successful. Now, the next stage, we're going to try and tackle each of these one by one and be able to create the final version of the game. Let's get started. Now, the first thing is probably the easiest, so I'm going to start from there, and I'm actually going to go in the order that I've written the problems rather than picking them off from the easiest. I think this just makes it easier for you to understand what's going on when I'm writing the code. But in your case, you can pick off the problems whichever order you want, as long as the final version works as you expect it to. To display the art, which is going to be the logo to begin with, I'm going to have to import that art file. And I'm going to use the from art import logo. This way I don't have to write art.logo every time I want to use it. Now I can simply just write print logo. So that's the first one tackled. That was pretty easy. Some of them are going to be a lot harder than that. The next one is to generate a random account from the game data. And remember, the game data is here in a separate file, and the data is held inside a variable called data. So let's go to the top and let's do the same thing. So from game data, import data. And now we can use that data to generate a random account. In order to generate a random item from that list, we have to use the random module. So I'm going to import the random module. And I can use that random module to tap into the choice function and pass in my data, which is a list. So this function is going to take this list and then find a random entry in there, which will give me a random account. Let's call this account maybe account A, and set that equal to the output from this random choice function. Now, I'm probably going to need more than one random account because I need to compare A against B. By calling random choice on data again, I make sure that I get a different random account. So at this point, we've got account A and account B, which hopefully are different from each other. But if you wanted to, you could in fact check and just make sure. So if account A equals account B, then in this case, you make sure that account B is regenerated. Often, as you're coding along, tackling the problems, smaller problems arise and you start thinking about what could happen and you start addressing that with code as well. So I think we're now done for this second problem and we're ready to move on to the next one. Let's format the account data so that we can print it out in this format. So the account name and then A and then whatever it is that they do, and finally from and where they're from. So we know that the data of each of these accounts is basically a dictionary. And we know that we access dictionaries using the key value pair. So we could, for example, access the account name by tapping into the random account, let's say account A, and then we use that square bracket and then we put in the key in here, which, let me just check, is the name. So let's put that right here, and this will go into that dictionary and pull out the value under the key name and save it to this variable. And we can do the same thing for the other two pieces of data we need. And just make sure that you don't have any typos in your keys here, because remember, they need to match these precisely in order for it to not error out. Now that we've got all of these pieces of data, we can now print the final version. So we're probably going to use an F string to insert all these pieces of information. And we'll probably start off with the account name and then a comma. We can write A and then put in the account description. And finally put from and the account country. That's pretty much it. But notice how I've done this just for account A, and I actually have to do it for both account A and account B. So instead of repeating all of this code, it might be a lot easier if I actually pull this out into a separate function. So let's create that here. Let's create a function that does this. I'm going to turn this into a docstring to explain the function, and I'm going to call the function format data. And it's going to take an input, which is the account. And now, using this account, we can make this more reusable by deleting the _a part of it. And of course, we need to indent everything over so that's actually within this function. And instead of printing the final outcome, I'm going to return it as the output. So now we can call that function down here and we can pass in each account in turn. For example, we could say print compare A, which is going to be the first account. So we're going to use our F string to insert the data that we get back from our function call, and I'm going to call it within the print statement. You can, of course, take it out and create a separate variable, but I think this should be clear enough to see what's going on. So we're going to call format data, and we're going to pass in the account A for this first line. And then I'm going to do the same for B. So in this case, I'm going to pass in account B, and it's going to format the data and then print it out. So as I always say, it's a good idea to run your code frequently. Probably anytime you solve a problem, you should probably run it and see it works the way you expect it to. So the first one, the logo gets printed. The second one, we've managed to get some random accounts because every time I run it, the accounts should be different. And finally, we format the account into this format with their name, their description, and their country all written out from the print statement using this lovely format data function we've created. We've already done really well, so let's keep going. Now, at the moment, it just says compare A, compare B, but instead, it'd be much nicer if we can put in that art, the versus ASCII art in between the A and B. Now you could write the line again from art import versus, but instead you could also just add a comma here and write versus. So now it's going to import both the logo and that versus art, and we're going to put it right here. So we're going to use a print statement, and instead of using a string inside double quotes, we're just going to write the name of the variable, which is called versus. And if we take a look at the final version, you can see it also says compare A against B. So we'll change the second word to against. And now when we run the code, it should look pretty much identical to the starting point of our final game. Let's tackle the next problem. We need to ask the user for a guess to see who has more followers, right? So I'm actually just going to copy this string right here, and I'm going to put that into an input. So who has more followers, A or B? And this input is going to come back as a string, and I'm going to save it inside a new variable called guess. Now, because it asks them for A or B, they might type A like this, or they might type A like this. Ideally, we should make it so that it doesn't matter what they typed, it'll still be valid as long as they typed an A. So we can turn this all into a lowercase format. So if they typed it capital like this, it'll become lower. If they typed it lowercase, then it's already lower, and it will be fine as well. So that way it's more consistent. So now our final product actually looks pretty much exactly identical, but it doesn't really have much gaming functionality yet. To do that, we have to move on to the next problem and check if the user got it right. In order to check if they got it right, the first thing we'll need is to know how many followers they each have, right? Each of the accounts A and B. Let's get a follower account. And that is going to be using the account A and then pulling out the data under the key follower account. So I'm actually just going to copy it to make sure I definitely don't make a typo. And I'm going to tap into account A and then pass in that key follow account. Remember, as a string, because our key is a string, so when we use it, also has to be a string inside double quotes. And I'm going to do the same for the B follow account from account B. Now I've tackled that mini step inside the problem. The next step is to use an if statement to check if the user is correct. Now again, I think this piece of functionality would be really nice if it was reusable. So I'm actually going to pull out of this main sort of flow of the game and define a separate function at the top. And this function is going to be called check answer. And it's going to get the guess, the A followers, and the B follower accounts. And I'm going to add some doc strings. So the doc strings are really important, especially when your function returns something. For example, in this case, it should actually say, takes the account data and returns the printable format. That makes it so much clearer what this function actually does. What are its inputs and what are its outputs? In our check answer, then it's going to take the user's guess and the follower accounts of A and B and then returns if they got it right. So how might we write this? Because the logic is actually a little bit difficult. We need to check which account has more followers, and then we need to check if the user actually got it right. So it's almost a two-step process. And I think in these cases, it's actually really worth sort of sketching it out. You can use a pen and a piece of paper. I'm just using Sketch right here so I can show it to you more easily. So let's just construct a simple sort of 2x2 matrix. And at the top, we've got the, let's say the user guess is A, and an alternative is they guess B. Now, these are the user's guesses, but then it's going to be compared against the actual reality or the answer, which is that A has more followers than B, and the alternative is that B has more followers than A. If the user guessed A and A indeed has more followers than B, then they got it right. And similarly, if they guessed B and B did indeed have more followers than A, then they would have also gotten it right. But if it was the opposite case, as in they guessed A, but actually B had more followers, then they would be wrong. And also if they guessed B and A has more followers, then they would be wrong as well. Now, using this table, we can now construct our if statement. There is a very, very long version of it, and there is a much shorter version of it. So the very long version would check for something like if the A followers is greater than the B followers. So A has more followers than B, and the guess is equal to A. Now, you can go through this kind of way and create 4 of these if and elif else statements, but it's very easy to get lost in some of the logic. And also, it means you have to type a lot of this out instead of using the else as the alternative. So I think a much easier way would be to first check if A has more followers than B. And in this case, you can then check, well, if the guess is equal to A, well, then that means they got it right. So I should return true. But if this was not right, then I should return false. An alternative and a much easier way of expressing this is to simply return guess equals A. Because when this is evaluated, is guess equal to A? Then it's going to return true. But if guess is not A, if it's B, then it's going to return false. So that's a little bit mind-bending, but if you actually go through it enough times, especially using a debugger like Python Tutor to just see how it works, then it should become pretty clear pretty quickly. In my case, all I need to do to express my table of possibilities is to first check if A is greater than B. Now, else, namely if the opposite was true, B was greater than A, then I'm going to return if guess is equal to B. So now basically the code says if A has more followers and they guessed A, then return true. If B has more followers and they guessed B, then return true. And if the opposite happens, then return false. Basically, it's going to return whether if the user got the answer right. Now we can basically check that in here, and we could create a new variable called isCorrect and set that to equal the output of our check answer function. So we're going to call it and pass in all the necessary things, the guess, the followers from A and B. So guess, and then the A follower count, and the B follower count. Now, once we know whether if they got it right or not, we can tackle the next step, which is give user some feedback on their guesses. So we can check, well, if is correct, well, in this case, we should probably print something like you're right. But if they didn't get it right, then we're going to print sorry, that's wrong. Now, in addition to giving them feedback, we should probably also keep track of the score. So we can start off our game with a score of 0. But as they play on, and if they get it correct, then the score should be incremented by 1 each time. And in addition to printing out your right, we should also give them some feedback on the current score. And if, Dory, you're wrong, if, sorry, they got it wrong, then we should also give them the final score, because at this point the game is going to end and they should know how well they did. So now let's go ahead and play our game and see if it works. So compare Cardi B against Kourtney Kardashian. I think it's probably going to be B, and it tells me you're right. And current score happens to be inside curly braces. So there's going to be a lot of debugging that you're going to need to do while you're writing this code. And you're probably going to make a lot of mistakes, but everybody does them, including me. If we get it right, we get the feedback, you're right, and the current score. If we get it wrong, then we get the answer, sorry, that's wrong, and the final score as well. That's all working so far. Now we have to figure out some sort of way of making the game repeatable. And as you might remember, that's usually going to require some sort of while loop. But it's important to think about which parts of our game actually repeat themselves, right? Because when we play the game, it looks like everything's kind of static. But if we think about it, the score is set to 0, probably can't be repeated. But the accounts probably do need to be generated, and they do need to be randomized again. And then we need to ask the user again, compare A against B, and then ask them for an input, and then check the answer. So all the rest of this probably needs to be repeated. So I would say everything from here probably should be within our while loop. So what is our while loop going to check? Well, maybe we could create a flag like game should continue and start out as true. And then while that's still true, then we'll repeat all of this code below. So let's indent that into the while loop. Now, at which point should this become false? Well, they get to keep going as long as they get the answer right, but the game ends as soon as they get it wrong. This is the point where we're going to change game should continue to false, so that once it prints, sorry, that's wrong, it's going to end the game. Now let's try and run the game and see if we can get our loop to repeat itself. I'm going to choose A, and you can see you're right, current score is 1, and now it's telling me to compare A, which is a new random person, against B, a new random person. As long as I get it right, it will allow me to keep playing the game. But as soon as I get it wrong, so I'm pretty sure that National Geographic sadly doesn't have as many followers as Kim Kardashian, so I think this is going to get me to exit the game. Sorry, that's wrong. Your final score was 3, and as you can see, my game has now ended. But notice how in the final version of the game, the count at position B actually becomes the one at position A in the next round. So the game kind of continues like this. And then once I guess this, Kim Kardashian is now going to become the one at position A, and it keeps on going as long as I got it right. So we now need to code this functionality into our program. At the very beginning, we generate a random account A and a random account B. But instead, what we want to happen is we want to make sure that the account at position B becomes the next account at position A. So once this game has run its course and we're looping back to the beginning again, the account A should become the previous version of account B. But this obviously will give us an error because there is no previous account B. So what we could do is we could actually take this out of the loop and say account B is equal to a random choice of data, and account A becomes that account B. But then the actual account B is going to be a new random account. let's play this through in our heads as a computer. The first thing that happens when the game starts for the very first time is we generate a random account B. Now that account becomes the account A, and then account B becomes a new random account. Now, when the game loops back, it's not going to touch these parts of the code. It's going to start from here. So now the account A is going to be replaced by the previous account B. And this new account B is going to be a new random account. But what if the new random account is still the same account? How can we get the code to continue checking until it has found a different account? Well, we could replace the if statement with a while loop. Then the code will keep checking until they are no longer equal. And this way, when we run our code, you can see that as long as I get the answer correct, then the previous B becomes the new A, and B now becomes a new random account. That's pretty much all of the functionality sorted, right? But we've got a couple of things to tidy up. One is we need to clear the screen in between the rounds of our game. So we know that we can import the clear function from the Replit module. But here's a question, where do you call it? Because if you call it at the very beginning of the while loop, like here, then what's going to happen is that your logo is never going to be displayed. And also, when you actually get the answer correct, like we will here, the result isn't shown. Because the result is shown at the very end of this while loop. And once that's done, it's going to loop right the way back here and it's going to clear everything in the console. And that's all going to happen in a fraction of a second, so the user won't actually see it. So we need to move this clear function. The ideal time, I think, to actually show it is just before they're about to see the outcome of their action. So somewhere here. So now, once we've asked the user what we need to ask, and we've got their answer, we clear the screen, and then we show them the outcome. Now we get to see the logo, we get to see all the verses, and A and B. Let's select B, and we got it right, so we get to see that feedback as well. It clears the screen, and we have a new comparison to make. Now, the only thing you'll notice is that the logo disappears in each successive round. It might be nice to see it even if we're going to the next round. So to do that, we have to print the logo just after we clear the screen, right here. So now, even though we've cleared the screen, we still get to see the logo, again, as long as we get the answer correct. That's all there is to it. We've now completed all of the functionality that's in the final version of the game. And it took quite a bit of code at the end, but as long as you broke it down into these smaller components, each of the components and each of the problems are much, much easier to tackle. I hope you enjoyed building this game and you have fun playing with it. I hope you enjoyed building this game, and I'll see you on the next lesson. Well done on completing day 14. Now, I have a study tip for you today, and that study tip is all about putting things in the calendar. So let's say that you complete one of the days and in one of the exercises you got stuck and you had to look at the solution. Don't worry, that doesn't mean you failed, that just means that you're learning. But the important thing is when you look at the solution that you actually really make sure you understand it. So not just read the code, but maybe Google some things around it, maybe rewatch some lectures, make sure that it makes sense and that you understand what's happening. Then go into your calendar and schedule to come back in a week and redo that exercise or code challenge. At that point, hopefully you've already embodied and absorbed all the knowledge and you understand what happened last time so you can complete it in the first go. So that's my tip for you. Put things in the calendar to review if you get stuck, and that's going to help you overcome more hurdles.